I started working at Street Law, it's now Street Law Inc. in Washington, D.C. in 1977, and Isidore at the time was on the board of Street Law. So there was a luncheon with the board members, and I sat next to him at a luncheon with him, and Kay was on the other side, his wife to whom he was totally devoted. When I started at Street Law, worked exclusively with prisons and mental hospitals. So while I was doing law-related education, it wasn't in the schools. So it wasn't until I moved to Seattle at the end of 1981 that I started programs in the schools. And it was at that point that the work that Iz had done with his writings and, his professional development and his presentations began to have an effect on the actual work that I did.
Actually, I met him in 1985,
okay.
And the State Bar of Texas had a course called Law and Humanities, which actually he's created with.
I was pretty new to the field,
program at the
and
State Bar.
there was this buzz that there was going to be a workshop presentation by Isidore. I didn't know who he was. I knew nothing about it, but when everybody starts talking about it, you think, well, it's like a sale, you got to go. And so I followed the leader and went to the room, and it was packed. The minute he started talking, you could just feel the joy. But he also had this amazing passion for what he was going to talk about.
And that's about the first time I met Isidore, because I heard about similar programs that we were running in Canada that were operating in the States. And so I was invited to some of the ABA conferences. And the first one I believe I was at Pheasant Run outside of Chicago. And that's when I met Isidore for the first time there. And that was such a great conference. Everyone was so welcoming. I believe I was there from British Columbia, and there was a couple of colleagues also from Alberta at the time. So we were like maybe 3 Canadians out of a number of Americans who were doing such exciting things. And it was just a really great opportunity to make those connections between what we were doing and what was happening in the U.S. And, of course, meeting Isidore was a wonderful bonus. I just remember him being he's so curious and so engaged with the other when he talks. So it's not about him. It's always about finding out what you are doing and the exciting things that are happening in your life and in your work.
He improved my work dramatically. We collaborated on a lot of activities in the state, and we did, for many years, we would go to the ABA Law-Related Education Conference and do joint presentations with Ed O'Brien, and it was a very wonderful time.
Isidore Starr has been an icon, a mentor, a hero of mine since I met him in the early 70s. His life story, teaching during the McCarthy era, starting his writings, I think are still relevant today about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And he was one of the most genuine people I've ever met in my life. And so Iz has just been a hero of mine. I stayed in touch with him until his passing, and I think the world lost a great mind and a truly dedicated person.
But I would say watching videos of him and reading his work and knowing how he ran his classroom has been very influential for me as a teacher. I am always struck by how he made his teaching relevant to students in the times that they were living in. I think of the 1950s and some of the issues that were going on. To take a law curriculum or any curriculum and make it relevant by looking at what's going on around you and then empowering them with what does the law mean and how do we think about these issues and how do we interact with these issues and change the world. I mean, change the law.
I met Isidore Starr in 1976 or 1977 when I would like to say that I was a high school student, but in fact it was my first year at street law, and it was the year that he retired. And so I was meeting this nice person from New York who was very smart and who was retiring and who I thought probably it would just be a one-and-done thing. But in fact, he then entered the 40 most productive years of his life in terms of law-related education. He edited the early editions of Street Law, the Constitutional Law and History materials, and certainly pointed out to me a number of mistakes that I had made, so I was glad to have that. And then I think he generally was an inspiration to practitioners and teachers across the country. And that went on for a long, long time.
I really have never stopped thinking about the movement. And I remember what he used to say when he talked about what happened when Truman left office, and this was actually based on a quote from Brandeis, that when the reporter asked Harry Truman what he was going to do now that he was not going to be president anymore, and he said he was going to take on the most important role in our democracy, that of citizen. And so, as a citizen, I can't stop thinking about the movement and the ways in which I ought to be doing something about furthering the LRA movement.
So he had been a mentor to me when I received the award for some time and continued until just recently when he passed away. So I immediately fell in love with this gentleman. I could not believe the breadth of knowledge and how fun he was to be with. And so at every opportunity, I was one of those people that was in the circle of trying to get more time with Isidore because he was just so charming and inspiring.
And Isidore brought to the classroom the interactive process, a lot more insightful representation of what students can do and will do if they're involved in a direct way.
I always was so impressed by this man's compassion for what was happening in the classroom and the ability to think about also at the same time what was happening in our country with current events and at the Supreme Court and other court levels.
He really was among the most inspirational people I ever had the honor to interact with. By talking to him or listening to him when he spoke, you could tell how deeply dedicated he was to this work, how important he thought the work was.
My first experience with Isidore, I was attending an LRE conference in Chicago or else Illinois, and they announced at the dinner that the next day Isidore Starr would be joining us, and he would be doing a session at the same time I was scheduled to do a session. And so I thought, well, this will be interesting. And the next day, I had about 2 people come to my session because everyone wanted to hear Isidore. So I gave out my materials, cut the session short, went to hear and I was mesmerized. His intelligence, his way of presenting things, his sense of humor, the twinkle in his eye, just was delightful.
One memory, which is fairly recent, is, and I think to protect some of the individuals involved, it will be important to be a little bit vague about this. I went out to Seattle for his 100th birthday party and was, I guess, part of the entertainment. So I played the piano, and some people did some singing. And Isidore did a lot of dancing. And some of the comments that he made to some of our colleagues were quite entertaining about how appealing he thought they still were to him. And I think at his age, no one thought of this as harassing behavior. People thought of it actually as remarkable behavior. So that's a memory from 5 or 6 years ago that sticks with me, and also I hope will inspire me to still be dancing and playing when I'm 100. Well, I think that the video that was made about Iz and his work, and especially the early years of his work during the McCarthy era, and how both innovative and courageous he was to be teaching about Supreme Court cases when no one else was really doing that, I think those are things that we shouldn't lose track of.
Okay. Well, in terms of my own work, the Judicial Institute that I do here in Seattle at the U.S. District Court for Western Washington, I'm now doing my 7th year of that. It's a 3-day program, and Isidore has participated in that. But we hold it at the court, and we involve the teachers. It's a professional development for teachers. And we have the judges who are issuing nationally recognized opinions, like Judge Robart on the immigration case, the travel ban case, speak to the teachers. The teachers have an opportunity to go and observe sentencings, new arrests. They get voir dired in a process as if they're really going up for jury duty. The year that the Gideon versus Wainwright case had its 50th anniversary, Isidore came and presented a video that he did as a series with Encyclopedia Britannica back in the 60s. He did 6 video and booklets on the cases, and the videos featured the actual people from the U.S. Supreme Court cases. So it was really Gideon himself is in the video, the trial court judge, Gideon's lawyer after he was appointed one. And so very moving and instructive material. So I was glad we were able to collaborate in that one.
One thing particularly memorable about Iz was the way he skillfully traversed any political minefields in the law-related education field. Whenever he explained the field, he was always careful to emphasize practical aspects, participatory aspects, conceptual programs, never putting his finger on the scale of one over another. And so I think everybody felt that they were equally valued by him, and that was important to everyone. And that was one of the many ways that he was an important leader in the field. He really embraced multiple approaches.
And so I met with a filmmaker who does films sort of in that area on legacy. And while I was meeting with her, she was telling me about some examples of how different things she has done for families and just videotaping older people and just on their lives and the impact that they've made and just how important it was for the families to receive these videotapes. And it was so interesting, Tiffany. I was sitting there and I'd come to her for my own situation. And while I was sitting there, it was almost like I had this message from on high.
Okay.
And it was like I have to do Isidore Starr. This is part of my mission in life, is to record Isidore. And we had, his 100th anniversary, his 100th birthday, and all of that had passed. But I think I wasn't really thinking about him. But I just really felt strongly that his work and his influence and his life needed to be recorded.
He was just an outstanding teacher. It's interesting. Just before he died, he wrote me a letter. And let me just read a portion of it to you because it really meant something to me. He said, "I'm now in a wheelchair at the age of 106, watching the world go by. I still look forward to a future that we all worked for and hoped for. The cliche that this will also pass has a great deal of truth to it. Our extraordinary influence throughout the country remains and hopefully will surface in the near future. I refuse to concede that one aberration will affect the seeds we planted. And I agree with his. And I think it is something that won't die. And I really do believe in our country and the rule of law, everything that is believed in. There are a whole bunch of us that do, and I am so grateful to the whole field for the wisdom that they've shared with me, too.
We have no idea. We can only imagine the legacy of Isidore Starr in each and every one of those students that were impacted in their classroom and that carry it with them today. So there's just a huge legacy of Isidore Starr that we see in future generations that will always be a tribute to him.
I do credit him, and I feel that a part of his legacy really is not only the impact that he had upon us as Isidore Starr Award recipients, but the trickle-down effect that his presence and his vision has had upon the students in our state and throughout the country.
It won't really matter that Izzy won't be there in person or on some huge screen in Chicago when the next awardee gets it, because Izzy's presence will always be in our field. He was such a magnificent person, such a good man, and he was an incredible educator.